I'm going to try and get things started. One of the problems with trying to organise a conference is that you have to organise the order of presentations. And in a way, the people who have the worst luck in this choice are, of course, the people who come at the end, because some people like to leave it, you know, they want to beat the traffic and so forth. So I think we ought to be especially nice to our final presenters. We have Lujia Feng from Manchester University, and we have Hany, who is a real star because he, in a sense, he was my reserve, because he sent an abstract a bit late, and I said, well, we haven't, the program is full, we haven't got room for anybody. But we've had a couple of people dropping out, so thank goodness Hany is here, including one of the dropouts was one of his colleagues, so he gets the prize. Thank you. So anyway, this is the final session of the conference, and I will not waste any more of your time at this stage. I ask Lujia to take the floor.
My name is Lujia. I am the first-year PhD candidate in the University of Manchester. I am on the early stage of my research, so it is my great pleasure to share my experience and to communicate with all of you. In the conference, many presenters and researchers talk about China and the Chinese influence on Tanzania. Now, the real China is coming. Are you excited? I'm sure you're excited about that, because it's also the last session about our conference. After that, you can go back home and have a very nice weekend with your families and friends. But first, you have to suffer my presentation. Okay. My research is about international human resource management in Chinese multinational corporations in Africa. And it focuses on Chinese headquarters and Africa subsidiaries from the perspective of standardization and adaptation of human resource management. Here is my research topic. Generally speaking, a wider aim of my research is to explore effective ways to find some policies and practices to address the inequality and imbalance of the cross-cultural and cross-national human resource management, especially in developing countries. The structure of my presentation today, it will start with my research background, and then it's my research aim and 4 specific objectives. And to be more detailed, I will talk about my research contextual factors and the 2 frameworks of my research. And next, I will give an introduction of a case study that is a Chinese multinational corporation. The headquarters is located in Shenzhen, China, and the subsidiaries I do research is in Africa, which are located in Ghana, Tanzania, Uganda, and Ethiopia. And the company is a telecommunication company. The name is Huawei. So mobile phone, very popular. And our presenter talk about the mobile phone part, okay? And then I will talk about my research methodology. The final part is my research motivation, okay? First is my research background. With the development of globalization and international investment, multinational corporations play an increasing important role in the global economy. According to the statistics of the United Nations in 2009, there were nearly 61,000 multinational corporations which controlled nearly 900,000 subsidiaries across the world. As for China, since 1979, the Chinese government carried out the open door policy. China has attracted the world attention because of rapid economic development. Especially in 2004, the Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping formulated the Go Global policy, that means 走出去 in Chinese, which encouraged many Chinese MNCs to enter the global market and to compete with their international counterparts. Against this backdrop, many Chinese MNCs began to find the new opportunities in Africa countries, considering the rich natural resources and the diplomatic relationship between China and the Africa governments. In the academic areas, there is a growing interest in the international human resource management because IHRM is closely linked with the competitiveness and strategic goals of MNCs in the global market. So here is my research aim and objectives. My research aims to explore the practices of IHRM in Chinese MNCs in Africa based on an integrative module, considering the specific factors that influence the balance of IHRM. To be more details, the first objective is in a general way to identify the main issues and contextual factors of IHRM in the globalization context. And then the second objective narrowed down to interrogate the main issues and contextual factors in the Chinese headquarters with the Chinese characteristics. And then the third objective also narrowed down to explore the IHRM policies and practices both in the Chinese headquarters and in the Africa subsidiaries, consider the African contexts. And to make my research in a more practical way, the last objective choose one of the most important practices of IHRM, that is performance management. Because first, the performance management is closely linked with other practices of IHRM, such as recruitment and selection, training and development, career development, reward system, and such as employee engagement. Secondly, performance management is also linked with contextual factor. The first contextual factor I'd like to talk about is culture. China is deeply influenced by the Confucian culture, which has 2,000 years history. It also influenced other Asian countries. But now the Confucian culture is still deeply embedded into the Chinese MNCs and influence their behavior. There are three core values of the Confucian culture. The first one is hierarchy, means 阶级 in Chinese. It can also be regarded as power distance of Hofstede's cultural dimensions. And relatively speaking, the Chinese MNCs have a high power distance. It can be regarded like the relationship between the headquarters and subsidiaries, as well as the relationship between the managers and employees. The second value is perseverance. It means 坚持 in Chinese. Because of the influence of perseverance, many Chinese MNCs, when they try to do some business, they prefer to avoid the uncertainty and circumstances and the situations. The last core value is thrift. That means 节俭 in Chinese. Because of the thrift and advocacy, many Chinese MNCs have a limited budget plan when they try to find new opportunities or try to invest in other countries. The thrift also influence their performance management policy and the bonus and the salary system. As for the Chinese MNCs in Africa, as many African countries has history of the colony, so they usually characterized by the bureaucratic features with a relatively high power distance and the focus on the nepotism. As many African countries has a diversity of the ethnic groups, they usually advocate the altruism, benevolence, and generosity. Because of the benevolence and generosity, many African people try to take care of their family members and friends. That is why nepotism is popular in some African countries. The second contextual factor is institution. The first part of institution is the role of the state and government. That means the regulation and some law formulated by the government, such as the global policy of Chinese government, as well as the diplomatic relationship between the governments. The second part of the institution is the role of international organizations, such as the United Nations, the ILO, and the trade unions, as well as some international NGOs. And the third part of institution is very popular. That is corporate social responsibility, the CSR issue. And there does exist some dispute about the new colonialism and the corporate social responsibility, because some people regard the Chinese investment into Africa like a new kind of the colonialism. Many Chinese companies recognize those kind of issues. That is why they advocate the CSR issues. That means they try to improve their organizational profit as well as the local community development. The main issues of the CSR is the triple bottom line. That means to strike a balance between the financial, the social, and environmental issues. And I will talk more about this part in my case study, okay? And culture and institution are two external factors which influence the practices of IHRM. Then I will talk the internal and contextual factor. And the first one is business strategy. Generally speaking, there are two main ownerships of Chinese MNCs in Africa. The first one is the state-owned enterprises, and the second one is the private sector. And about the industrial sector, and they have the knowledge-intensive ones, such as the high-tech telecommunication companies, and the labor-intensive ones, such as the manufacturing, the service, the textile, or maybe the infrastructure. The last internal factor is organizational structure, and it means the country of origin, which refers to the places where the headquarters is located, and the host country, the places where the subsidiaries are located. And the final one is the integration of the organization. That means the relationship between the headquarters and subsidiary, as well as the international integration of the organization into the global market. Based on those contextual factors, this is my first framework. IHRM policies and practices in Chinese multinational corporations in Africa is influenced by two external factors. They are culture and institution. And they are also influenced by the internal factors. They are business strategy and organizational structure. That is a case study. My case study is a telecommunication Chinese multinational corporation, and the name is Huawei. Huawei is a private-owned Chinese multinational corporation in Africa. Actually, initially I planned to choose a state-owned Chinese company, such as the Sinosteel, the China State Construction Corporate. But when I try to collect some data or do some interview, I find it's a bit difficult to collect some data or do some interview because of the confidential issues, and especially when I try to collect some public or governmental documents. So considering this point, as my research aims to find the fact, what is the fact? What is the IHRM policies of the Chinese MNCs in Africa? So that is why I chose a private-owned company. As the high-tech sector is a relatively new sector compared with the manufacturing or the infrastructure sector, so I choose. Sorry, I have some water. Okay, thank you very much. So that is why I choose the high-tech areas, because it's relatively open, and then the manufacturing or other sector. Thank you. Okay. This Chinese MNC is also influenced by the external factor. First is institution. And about the regulation of local government, for example, when I do interview about Chinese subsidiaries in Ghana, they cite when they try to get the visa for Chinese expatriate in Ghana, they have a requirement from the Ghana government to recruit more local employees or certain numbers of the local employees. And the second factor is the diplomatic relationship between Africa and China. The Chinese government has support and both the financial and political support to the Chinese MNCs in Africa to help them to build the telecommunication network in many countries. And third one is a cooperation with some international organization. Huawei has cooperation with some local organization, maybe the higher education higher education organizations such as Ghana University, as well as the local NGOs and international NGOs such as the ILOs. And the second factor is culture. As the Chinese Confucian culture influenced the Chinese employees in Africa, they usually characterized by the generosity and the win-win opportunity to share benefits with Africa employees. So, from my interview, they think their relationship with the local employees is relatively good. And another way for the Chinese company to share their benefits with the local people is to do the outsourcing. Many Chinese subsidiaries in Africa, in Ghana, in Tanzania, they have a kind of outsourcing and cooperation with many local corporations. That is why they are more welcomed than some in their companies. That is my telephone interview from the HR managers. Okay. So, what is the key part of the Chinese multinational corporation try to make a success in Africa? That is the balance. And the balance is also a very important part in Chinese Confucian culture. Here, the balance includes two parts. The first part, that means the balance of the IHRM policies, from the Chinese headquarters and the Chinese subsidiaries. And the second one, the balance means the benefits between the organizational profit and the local community development. Actually, the balance has a very long history in the Confucian culture, and it comes from music, because Confucius think balance music can make people has a more civilized behavior. And in the 21st century, the Chinese government borrowed the balance from the old Confucian culture. We call it 和谐. It can also be loosely translated as harmony in English. Internally, the Chinese government advocate a 和谐社会. That means a harmonious society, a world of the society which is oriented by the middle income classes. It also, externally, the government advocate a kind of share and cooperation and understanding. So the Chinese MNCs try to improve their international image and reputation. But it's really the balance or just a strategy to improve their international reputation and image. So that is an important part for my research. I will try to do my field work and to find what is the reality, okay? So this is second framework, and it is about IHRM transfer from West to East and then come back to the West. That means I take some mature experience of HRM and IHRM from Western Europe and North America, and then transfer them to the East, to China, with the Chinese Confucian characteristics. And then those kind of policies transferred again to the East, to Africa, with some with both the Chinese characteristics and the Africa local context, such as the colonial culture and the ethnic groups feature. This is a comparison study between subsidiaries of Chinese MNCs in Africa. It's also transferred from the East and the West, as Tanzania is located in the East and Ghana is in the West. The main features of the subsidiary of the Chinese MNCs in Ghana is divided into three parts. The first part is the four core policies of IHRM. And that is 选用预留 in Chinese, translated in English is selection, training, application, and retention. The second part is an important approach for the Chinese companies to deal with differences. That means 求同存异. It can be translated like seek common ground and reserve differences with flexibility. That is why the subsidiaries in Africa has a lot of flexibility. They even have a separated and independent performance management system and reward system, not like the Chinese employees in Africa. So the third issue is the corporate social responsibility. To improve this part, Huawei has an independent department, the public relations department, called 公共关系 in China, because 公共 means public and 关系 means relations, because 关系 is the important value. For example, the Huawei in Ghana has a cooperation with Ghana University. They provide mobile phone or other electronic devices to the university students with a discount price, so that they can get resources or the help from the talents and the professional students. This kind of cooperation. And here comes the emerging research themes. The first one is the practices of IHRM in Chinese MNCs in Africa. The second one is the contextual factors. And it includes culture, institution, business strategy, and organizational structure. And then it's a dispute about new colonialism and CSR. The final one is a comparison study about Chinese MNCs in Ghana, Tanzania, Uganda, and Ethiopia. And based on those kind of themes, my research methodology is the triangulation. That means to link the qualitative and quantitative. I use questionnaires and documents as a pilot study to develop a broad picture of my research. And then I will use semi-structured interviews and focus group discussion to find what kind of contextual factor is and what is the influence of those factors. Based on all of these, I will give an integrative model to explore performance management of IHRM in Chinese MNCs in Africa. The last part of my presentation is my research motivation. In other words, why am I here today? The answer is, for the sake of my dream. My dream is to make my small contribution to serve the world and to make a better world for us to live in. Actually, there does exist the imbalance and inequality, especially in the cross-cultural and cross-border human resource management. But through appropriate policies and practices, those kind of imbalance and inequality can be reduced. Benefits and development can be shared by different nations, different partners, and different continents. That is the motivation of my research. So the PhD study is not only a degree or job for me, it is a pursuit of my dream. For the sake of my dream, I am here today. For the sake of my dream, I will continue. Thank you.
First of all, thank you, David, for the kind invitation, or for the my thanks to the conference organizers to give me that great chance to be here today. My name is Hany Abdel-Latif. I'm from Swansea University. Basically, I come from Egypt, which means I'm kind of, I would say, African. People normally get surprised when I say I'm African, because they normally say you are Middle Eastern or MENA countries or whatever, but believe it or not, we are in Africa. So that's one thing I have to start with. Another thing is just kind of confession is David has just apologized by putting me the last session and the last presentation. My point is that it's not easy to be the last presentation in the conference, but the surprise is that kind of I get used to that. I already shared this with other people in the conference before in the break. So my little secret that I do, actually, I tell a story. That's my secret, to keep the audience just listening to me. But today, unfortunately, I'm sorry, I'm not able to do the same thing, because I'm here to learn the story from you. And I was just quite scared by being there in front of those experts in Tanzania, because I haven't done much work in Tanzania. My background about Tanzania just is not going to go beyond, or is not beyond what I'm going to show you today. So hopefully you will be able to tell me the story. This project, Global Financial Crisis, Credit Access and Children in Tanzania, is part of a broader project which is about the financial crisis, how the financial crisis affects developing countries. So my main question, or my main interest, what are the channels? How could a shock happen in US or in a developed country or in Europe and affect developing countries like Tanzania? So there must be some links. My job is just to find these links. The link I'm looking at today is the credit access and how this could be linked to children in Tanzania. Let me tell you first what I think is the context I'm working on, which I'm not really sure that this is what I could say is the context, because I haven't been before in Tanzania, which is a bit shame, I would say. But please, if you hear me saying something that is not true, or is not part of that context, please feel free to stop me and say, Hany, shut up, this is not what's going on in Tanzania. So I would still accept that. So based on the estimates from the ILO, the International Labour Organization, the estimate for child labor has decreased, or has dropped worldwide by 10%. Most regions have done very very good job, except Sub-Saharan Africa, which seems to be running far behind. When I look at Tanzania context, I find that the figures coming from there, 2006, there was 70.4% children involved in work, and this is a kind of more conservative definition of a child labor. And if we consider a broader definition of child labor, this figure will goes up to more than 85%. Normally in Tanzania, the mainland, they work in cultivation of coffee, tea, timber, and tobacco. In Zanzibar, it's production of cloves. Interestingly, there is a separate legal system that there's different legal system between Tanzania and the mainland and Zanzibar, but both they share one thing: they allow light work, but they prohibit dangerous work. And the more interesting thing that in many occasions they don't define what could be dangerous and what could be defined as light work. In the mainland, there is a specific law which has just came out recently, 2009. It's Child Labor Act. In Zanzibar, there's no such specific law, but it comes part of the main law, Employment Act. Of course, there is Anti-Trafficking in Person Act in 2008, and as you can see that all these laws or legal framework, they just came out very recently. What happened in Tanzania during the crisis? Tanzania wasn't hit directly by the crisis because Tanzania doesn't have it's not well integrated with the financial markets, international financial markets. So that's why we can say Tanzania has survived the first round of the global crisis effect, which started 2007, 2008. So there is no direct impact or no evidence there is a direct impact of the crisis. However, the global recession which came after affected Tanzania in some ways. So if you look at this graph, you will see the quarterly GDP 2007, 2011 to 2011, and you'd see that the second quarter in 2009, it was very obvious that there is something happening with the GDP there. And although you can see, even though you can see that there's some improvement or recovery, which was very surprising, but this is another evidence that will say it's not very direct link between Tanzania and the global crisis, but still there is some other story that credit access will tell us in just a few minutes. So what happened to the credit access, or what's the status of credit access or credit supply in Tanzania? There are 20 licensed banks, 11 non-bank financial institutions, and 650 saving and credit cooperatives, 16 NGOs, microfinance institutions. The credit to private sector is less than 8% of the GDP. What was shocking to me is that 89% of Tanzania never banking before. That's what I have read in this paper. 8% currently banking or have a bank account. So what happened with the crisis? How the crisis affect this context? What I'm assuming here, what I'm proposing in this paper, in this piece of work, I'm saying that what happened is that it had to take time until the effect of the crisis went through the Tanzanian economy. And if we look at this graph here, this is credit to Tanzanian private sector, and you can see it's very obvious here that even if the GDP showed that the shock or the crisis affected Tanzania in the second quarter in 2009, it continues to affect the credit suppliers, if I would say, a willingness to lend out some money, because this is what has been explained in by the Tanzanian bank, or the Central Bank of Tanzania, that they were hesitating to give money, even though the government think the economy, or all the statistics show that the economy is recovering and there is nothing to be worried about, and even though they still hesitating to give money out. Based on the data I'm going to use, I'm using this piece of work. There was like 40% drop between 2000 in the credit given to household, because the figure I've just shown now is this is the credit given to the private sector, so which includes business and individuals. So based on the data I'm using, there's a drop, 40% drop of credit, the value of the real value of credit that given to household between 2008-9, which is the first round of the data I'm using, and the second round, which is 2010-2011. So, what's my motivation to do this work? First thing, the empirical work has to agree, or has come to that point that we agree that financial development is considered as a pro-growth and pro-poor policy instrument. However, the poor, or the Tanzanian poor, are financially excluded, or I can say they are financially illiterate. And I'm sorry for my Tanzanian friends here, because they didn't agree on the second one, but I'm sure they will agree with the first one. At least they are excluded. Child labor in general, it's unresolved phenomena, and it's specific, in more particularly in the poor communities. So what this has to do with the children, credit access. So what's the connection here? When you look at the, when you think of access to credit, household access to credit, you could have two different point of views in the empirical work. If you give parents money, if you give them loans, if you give them credit, they might start their own businesses, and this increased likelihood that the child will engage in child labor. That's one of the points that has been raised by the empirical literature. And the more interesting thing is, if I want to give some support to this argument or this statement, if we look at the literature on child labor, we'll see that we can classify this in two groups. Some of them look at why producers or why firms hire children. Do they produce? Does this have something to do with their productivity or wages or whatever? And the other group is why parents send their children out to work. And the point I'm making here is that 90% or the vast majority of this literature look at only one side, why parents send their children out to work. And that's very clear and obvious, because in most times, in the most situations, you will find that household is the employer of the child as well. So that's why most of the literature is just focusing why parents send their children to work, and you will find few papers looking at why employers employ children. So that's one view. So give people money, give them credit. They will use it to start their small businesses, and children will be engaged in that business. Or the other one, give the other point of view. Just when you make credit available, this will give another coping mechanism to the parents, so they have kind of choice now to keep their children in schools and rely on that money, and then in return, when their kids grow up and they go to work, they're gonna work and they're gonna pay this back to them. So it's kind of two different or contradicting view looking at the relationship between credit access and children. But what I'm looking at here, or the context I'm looking at here, show that the financial crisis means limited access to credit, and as I said, it distorts the household decision regarding children work. And normally when time of crisis, the parents make decision, they get affected by outside. They might make not rational decisions. They don't make it because they're under pressure of the shock. So that normally comes on the expense of women and children. So that's very obvious link. Regarding the policy intervention, as I just said now, they're just looking for some coping mechanism, how to survive the shock. So any successful policy would offer them some alternatives that they can do. So stop saying, oh, you can't tell them, don't send your children to work. No, tell them what they should do when there's a crisis, when they have income shock. So tell them what they can do. You can't tell them what they can't do, because they're gonna send them to work. So you have to offer them something in return. Anyway, so I've got an example of subsidized credit schemes. It hasn't been proved to be very effective. My objective here is to estimate or to measure the global financial crisis effect on children through access to credit. I want to emphasize here that I'm looking at the short-term effect of the access to credit. My contribution here is unlike all the other literature that using self-reported shocks. So they go to parents, they go to household, and they ask them about different kind of shock, and they just tick the box. So it could be something that people just complain about their living standard, but using the financial shock or the financial crisis is totally exogenous shock, and it's very clear shock. I'm introducing kind of novel instrument that I can use to measure credit access. Of course, this is the first study to measure the shock impact on children and the link between this and credit access. And I will propose some policy implication. That's the data I'm using. I'm just gonna go through this very quickly. It has 2 rounds. The first round was 2008, as I said, 2009. The second round was 2010, 2011. And based on the data I've just shown about the credit to private sector, I'm assuming that the shock happened or fully realized somewhere in between these two. That's the main model I'm using. So here, Y is equal to 1 if the child work, equal to 0 if the child doesn't work, credit if the household gets credit, receive credit, shock, this happened in time 2 or round 2. Credit shock, this is my main interest, which is beta 3, which is the difference in difference estimator. So which X is the number of regressors, that gender, age, rural, whether they are based in rural areas, and household members, the number of household members, and some list of other regressors. The only problem I have here, or the main problem I have here, that this way of estimating the effect of the crisis assume that both groups who received credit and those who didn't receive credit, they are very similar to each other, which is not necessarily to be true. So they might be different somehow. So they might, because what I can observe is those who already got credit, not those who apply for credit and they were not accepted or their application were not successful. So I can't assume that those who got credit, those only people who has access to credit. There might be some other parents who had the chance to apply for credit, but just simply they didn't apply or they don't want to have credit. So the literature offers some answer to this question, which is using instrumental variables. And here's the procedure I'm using. I'm not gonna explain it in details, but if anyone is interested, you can just talk to me after. My instrument actually combine both the microfinance institutions in a specific region and the assets. And the novelty here, or the new thing here, is that I'm not using the value of assets, because if I use the value of assets, it will pick somehow the wealth effect in this relationship, which is correlated with the child labor, which is not gonna do exactly what we want to do. So that's what I'm doing here. It's just I'm counting how many assets they have. I'm counting how many microfinance institution working in the region, and I construct the new instrument, which I called micro asset, which take a value from 0 to 1. So 0 means no access to credit, 1 is like 100% they have access to credit. That's kind of showing the relationship between the number of institutions working in some areas and the index. The estimation here, I'm just jumping to the estimation because I have only 5 minutes. My main interest here is 1 minute, okay. Okay, so just simply and very quickly, so my main interest here is credit crisis. That what show, that's the, what we can see here is that it increased child labor. So the first panel, that 1, 2, 3, 4 are different models. I'm using different regressors, different variables. So I can see here, what I can see here is that positive effect. So child labor has increased because of the shock, because what happened, the shock decreased the available credit, and then this forced the household or the parents to send their children to work. What happened to the school attendance? It's negatively affected the school attendance. that before using my instrument show a similar story. Well, exactly the same story, sorry. But when I looked at child is a very like loosey word, so you need to define who is the child. So in my sample, that's something that I should have started with. I defined the child is from 6 to 16, and then you wouldn't have, or you wouldn't see any agreement in the literature about the age of the child. So I changed it a little bit from 8, start from 8, because given that in Tanzania they have, well, I think they should start school from 6 years or 5, I don't remember. And they have some, when they are 6 years old, so they have kind of delay enrollment as well. So that's what I'm saying. I start with 8, from 8 to 16. I differentiate between rural and urban and above poverty line. So I construct the national poverty line. So I split the sample between above and below that line. So what we can see, or what we can conclude from all this, that the negative shock to credit increases child labor and school dropout. Child work and schooling are not mutually exclusive incidents in Tanzania, which means if I go back to the tables, you'll see that the magnitude of the coefficient is much bigger with the case of child labor, but not the same response with the school. So which means that children, they go to school, but they go to work as well. So they don't drop out school, they combine both together. Older children or older child is more likely to join the labor market, which is kind of expected. It's very, it's something that prevalent in the rural communities, which is again expected. What is important for policy here is that when I split the sample between above and below the poverty line, credit access show that it works above the poverty line, which means there's kind of threshold, income threshold, that above which any strategy or any policy intervention based on giving people credit might work, but below that line is not going to work, because simply they will take the money, they will take the credit, and they will send the children to work as well. So that's what I'm introducing here. So or the policy I'm discussing here. So kind of if we have a subsidized credit, per se might not be sufficient. It has to be in some context. And if you want to have kind of rural-oriented credit programs, that has to be combined with financial awareness campaigns. So you have to teach people, you have to show people that what opportunities they have. The limitation of this study, child labor is kind of a legal thing, so it is underreported. So I expect the results to be much higher than what I found. And I didn't make any distinction between formal and informal credit. And that's very important, because in the context of Tanzania, it's equally important. So 50% of my sample, they get credit from formal sources, and the other 50% they get from neighbors and friends. A cross-country study will help to generalize these results. I can't generalize these results. I'm just talking about Tanzania. And that's all I got. So hopefully you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're paradoxical between your session and our previous session, because we are told that child labour is a bad thing and there's too much of it. The previous session, it was suggested that youth labour is good and there's too little of it. Yeah, there's some sort of paradox there, and obviously if you choose your age, the picture becomes quite different. If your children become youth or your youth become children, it becomes good or bad accordingly. And that has to be looked at. One other final small point, you might not be aware of from the data, but there is a minor revolution going on at the moment in terms of financial connections. And that is the introduction of of mobile phone financial transactions. And this doesn't appear anywhere in the data, but it's an explosive but very recent growth. Now, there are an enormous number of urban-rural transactions financially carried through the mobile phones. Whether this involves credit or whether it just involves family transfers, I have no idea. What the implications are in a broader sense, I have no idea. But the fact that it's a very significant phenomenon is very clear indeed. Thank you.
Karen, please.
I'm Karin, I'm postgraduate student project management, and I have a question for the second presentation. To just explain where I'm coming from, I'm currently doing my dissertation on issues of exclusion in microfinance on the supervision of Patrick Ryan. And the thing I was wondering when I was listening to you is about your two assumptions you posed in the beginning, saying the credit acts as a coping mechanism, and that credit will lead to small businesses, that will lead to an increased income, and thus a decrease in child labour. Lesson one for me when I started this was credit means debt. And talking about coping mechanism, especially when you talk about those below the poverty line, I wonder, is it really a coping mechanism, or do they, like you say, do they really just take the credit and still send them to the children to work, or are these people actually able to be entrepreneurs, to make a profitable business in a competitive market, and then also pay back their debt? I think that's an issue you sort of didn't address. That is important.
Thank you.
Thank you. My comments and probably a bit of question goes to the second speaker, Hany. You talked, I think there is a kind of factual issue here about the child, you mentioned about the Child Labour Act. I think it's the law of the Child Act of 2009, which does have some provisions about child labour, so I don't think there is a Child Labour Act. That's one. And second, as I think some of my points have been mentioned, is about whether you are making a difference between child labor and the child work, because child work is like children learning skills so that they can use that in the future. For example, in Tanzania we have the Chaga tribe. They tend to take their children to their shops, to their business, so that they can learn the trade. But that wouldn't termed as child labor. So there is a cultural issue here, cultural construction of what can be termed as child labor and what can be termed child work. I would guide you probably to read Rosemary Okori's PhD thesis, is available online. She did very good research on child work in Enugu, Nigeria. So probably it will inform you you are studying. And I'm also not sure whether you are using, whether you choose to use child labor. Are you referring to part-time or full-time children, what do you call, working? Because I did research a few years ago on child labor and academic progress in Dar es Salaam, and my findings were that children were attending school regularly. There was no problem with attendance, except their progress were somehow affected. So maybe you may want to consider those issues. Thanks.
Okay, I'll ask our presenters to reply to those three questions. Please be as brief as possible, and if we have any more questions, please try to make your questions very brief. Right, okay.
Thank you very much for your question and suggestion. As for Brian's question, I think the aim of my research is to find a solution, practical solution, and an integrative framework about IHRM of Chinese MNCs in Africa, and how to make my research in reality. I think the key point is to collect the first-hand data, and I am on the early stage of my research. So in the second year, I will go my field work. I will I have my own experience in Africa. I plan to go to Ghana and to do the interview and observation in the Chinese subsidiaries in Ghana. And I will try to collect some data to find the fact. And I also very curious about what is the fact and what is the result about my dream. So, and if you are interested in it, you can follow my research about my result. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. And regarding the mobile transactions and or financial transaction through mobiles, I didn't know about it before that. So it's probably something that I need to look at, and I need to see whether this may create more available somehow. So I should consider this because, of course, it's not my data. So the next question was about the what is the link, how it works, the dynamics, the mechanism, how it works between credit and child labor. What I started with and what I ended up with are somehow similar. So I started with that there are two different views. So credit might means that small business that the children would be involved in, or could go the other way. So that means give the parents different chance to choose to keep their children, because this is these shocks normally just come temporary shocks. So and everything maybe will be improved later. So it's just kind of giving parents choices. So again, so that's one view, and that's another view. So what I have ended up with is that I can't support that one or that one. It depends on the level and of income or income level. So the situation they live in the context, because if they are very poor, so it doesn't matter if you give them credit, it's just waste of money, because what they're gonna do if the intention was giving credit out because you want to combat child labor, so it's not going to be successful, because in all cases they're going to get the money and they're going to start the small business and they're going to send their children to work. And but in different contexts, if they somehow above some threshold, that's what I call income threshold, somehow above that level, it might be a successful policy tool. Regarding the points that Frederick has raised, thank you for informing me about these theses and these resources that I need to read definitely. Anything you said about the act or the law, the new law that was issued 2009, I can't. I'm not sure about it, because it's something I read in books. You're more aware about this more than I am, so I can't argue with this. So, of course, definitely, so you're right. In terms of the distinction between child labor and child work, that's very important. But again, it's something that is not established as you don't have like a very obvious definition of child labor. It's the same thing as you said, as you aid, is culture thing. So people think that a child, even like child age, that could be considered a child to work from 5 to 16. Some other people, or in some different contexts, maybe they look at from till 18, maybe till 14 years old. So it's something that it differs based on the culture. And as you said, it could be something acceptable in Tanzania and some place, because the culture thing that of course I didn't take into account, which I need to look at again. In terms of the part-time and full-time, I consider the child work, even if he or she works for part-time. So as long as they are involved in any economic activity, so I consider them working. And yeah, so that's my response. I don't know if I addressed all your questions or not. So thank you.
1, 2, and I think we'll call that the end.
Thank you. My name is Kamzora from Tanzania. Probably let me say, in Tanzania there is a saying which says, if you want to coil a fish, you have to coil it while it is still raw before you bake it or you do whatever. So you have to coil it while it is still raw. And I think this has some bearings on the way kids learn to work. So I understand some of the definitions which may be out of context in terms of some of the cultures. I think most of the parents love their kids, and if you really love your kids so much, and you don't train him or her, start working at early stage, almost in some places you have lost it. There's some skills which need to be inculcated when a kid is 3 years. Of course, there's that dilemma in some of the, at least the urban areas where this thing has been bombarded so much. So I think you are taking an assumption without even defining well what is this child labor or the difference between child work. So I can understand coming from different culture, probably you feel or you get some problems when you come to some societies. I understand that some kids, you see them who have been abandoned by their parents. If you mean those, definitely that is too bad. But if you want a child is living in a family and is learning to do some things and let him or to go to work, to school and play, but somehow well assists in some of the family chores, I think that would be the natural thing. We are talking like, I've read somewhere in the States where even some of the farmers don't agree with the definition of child labor. And finally, let me say that on the financialization, on the issues of credit, probably you better read your countryman works, Samira Amil, on how he's talking about the negative effect on financialization of some of the economic activities. Probably it will open some of the mind looking on if the credit provision is totally good or it has some issues. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Ben Taylor. I work for Twaweza in Tanzania. Yeah, a couple of comments briefly. Firstly, for Hany. You may be interested, and Brian, you may be interested to know as well that mobile money is extended now beyond mobile money for transfers. You can actually get credit directly from the mobile phone companies. So those who are buying mobile phone credit to use to make calls, they earn the ability over time to borrow money from the mobile phone companies as well. Secondly, also to Hany, I think the issue of domestic work for children is a particularly pertinent one in Tanzania that would be worth looking at. The particular part of Tanzania that I know best is famous throughout the country for providing very good house girls who are typically taken out of school age 13 or 14 and sent to completely different parts of the country to work as domestic labour for middle-class Tanzanians living elsewhere. And finally, it's a question for our Chinese presenter. Sorry, I can't pronounce your name. You spoke about corporate social responsibility as being part of IHRM. In Tanzania, I think what the majority, I'm guessing, I don't have data on this, but I'm guessing what the majority popular view would be on Chinese companies working in Tanzania would be the issue of the nationality of the employees. That employing or bringing in large numbers of Chinese employees to work even in manual labour positions in some companies would be seen as unacceptable, and yet that does seem to be the practice in a lot of cases. I just wonder whether that's something you're considering as part of your work. Thank you.
If it's a very short question, yes. It has to be very short.
What is the main difficulty for Chinese people when they're working in Africa? In cross-cultural context, it's difficulty I want to know. Is that for communication or?
It's a very nice short question, but I think it has a very difficult.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, you have to give a very difficult short answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And thank you very much for your question. As for Taylor's question about the CSR issues of IHRM in Chinese corporations, in the manufacturing sectors, there is huge Chinese expatriate employees in Africa. That is a reality. But my research is focused on the high-tech sector. According to my research about the government some statistics, the registered companies in Tanzania in 2012 is about 300 companies with registered capital of $1 billion. And in the high-tech sector, and the work condition and the salaries of the Chinese worker and the local worker is a different system, but they're relatively high, and their number is tightly limited by the Tanzanian government as well as the Ghana government, because they have this kind of requirement when they try to get the visa for the Chinese expatriate workers. But for the manufacturing areas, this is not my section, but maybe in the future I will focus more on this part, okay? Thank you. About the second question, I think it's quite difficult, but from my short interview with the HR managers in the Chinese MNCs in Africa, they said to deal with this kind of differences, they have a kind of maybe the tricky strategy, that is to use the local people as the middle managers, and then they can manage the huge local employees. So they just try to find some top local managers, and they have a kind of communication with those managers, less people. And then when they have some policies or new technologies or new devices, and the local managers will communicate with the local workers to deal with this kind of difference. About the first information, and follow my research result. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I'll be very quick. What I've received here is that something again related to the culture in terms of whether parents, of course, they love their children, but whether they send them to do domestic work or domestic labor, something again goes back or take us back to the culture thing. So it's something that, of course, I haven't considered. So I need to do. Whether credit is good or bad for children work or child work or not. That's what I'm trying. What I'm trying to say is not whether credit is good or bad. I'm trying to look at whether policy intervention that based on making credit available to household is good or bad, when it works and when it does not work. So that's my main point. In terms the last thing regarding that mobile phone could be used for getting credit, that's very valuable information that I didn't know before, which is I'm really thankful to you for that. I mean, in general, I'm very thankful to be here because it's a really good opportunity to learn from you about the context. And I think this is the thing that I started with. I don't know the context, and I'm here to learn about it. And thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I think, first of all, thank you very much for our two speakers. Secondly, Dan has something you want to say, which I hope is very brief.
It is very brief. It's a brief correction. Thanks to Ben Taylor for pointing this out. I was excessively critical of the household budget survey, and I need to point this out. It doesn't use assets in its calculation of poverty line indexes. That is true, but I said it didn't collect assets at all. That is false. There are asset data in there. They are not used with poverty dynamics. Ben, thank you.
Okay, so it's now my job to say thank you to a number of people. And the first people I want to say thank you to are the audience, because without an audience, you can't have a conference. And without an audience, you don't get questioned. So I think you should applaud yourselves. The second group of people I want to thank collectively is all of the people who've given presentations at the conference. and all of the people who've acted as chairs, most of whom have also given, most if not all of whom have given presentations. So thank you very much for those people. And also thank you very much to Costa and Sophie. Sophie is hiding behind there, and Costa, I think, Costa is out there, so you can say thank to him on the way out. And thank you very much to our camera IT people, that's Sam and Brad, for looking after that aspect, because that's very important for our program with Swansea University. And now I want to make some specific thanks to people who've come from quite a long way to come to this conference. And first of all, I think I should thank my colleagues from Swansea University who've come all the way from Tanzania. Joe Kizilwa, Faustin Kamazora, and Bahati Belemo. Secondly, possibly, I'm not sure whether it could well be even further, all the way from UCLA. Michael, slightly nearer, but still from abroad. Brian Van Arcady has come from Italy, so thank you, Brian. And I should also, in his absence, thank Andrew Coulson, because he's been helping me to some extent in suggesting people who might want to come to the conference. And I should also thank Behrooz, who has helped me with some ideas about organising the conference. So thank you to Behrooz. And I think that just about leaves everything there in sufficient time for me to get Brian down to the station.
Except, David, you have not thanked yourself.
Well.